Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are tuning in to join us. This is welcome to podcast with Kingsgate Advisors Institute. This is our very first podcast, and who are we? Kingsgate Advisors Institute is an economic think tank um, with a vision of creating actionable solutions that is able to help economies and individuals and even communities to unlock their full potential. And one of our programs, so one of our flagship programs is podcast where we bring experts and specialists to bring perspective and insight into some of the burning and structural issues affecting the global economy. And today being the first of its kind, the very first episode, we have with us a distinguished expert, a political economy specialist, and is here to talk to us about Trump 2.0, the world new order after the um after Trump's new election and the second term as the president. We have seen a lot of things happening in the last few weeks. What does it mean to the global economy? What does it mean to Africa and also to Nigeria? How do we make sense of all these policies and all these executive order? How do we position ourselves? Are there opportunities for us, or does it always feel dim? So we are privileged to have with us today Mr. Usman Alabi. He is a passionate crusader for social change and social reforms who believes in the need for disruptive methodologies to address the current socio-economic conditions in sub-Saharan Africa. He was a senior associate with Red Media Africa for 5 years, leading the Future Project Governance Department, and he briefly worked with the Nigeria Economic Summit Group. Currently, Mr. Usman is a doctoral researcher at the University of Warwick, and his research focus is on everyday political economy, on counter-terrorism. And prior to that, he had received broad training in global politics and comparative political economy during his undergrad and his master's degree at the University of Lagos. Also, Mr. Usman Alabi is a senior research fellow with Kingsgate Advisors Institute, and his work is within the political economic cluster, and is working on the intersection between political context and decision making as it relates to macro and microeconomic issues. All right, everyone, join me to welcome with us Mr. Usman Alabi. You're welcome. We're glad to have you. Good afternoon.
Thank you. My pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
All right. I mean, Trump. A lot has been said. We have seen a lot of perspective from the economic side. It's time for us to hear from a political economist. Let's hear what is really happening. And the first question that I'm going to start with is America first, the trade policy. Can you make sense of all these to us? What does it mean? Because Trump has reinstated his high tariffs on Chinese goods and proposed new trade restrictions. Now, these policies are protectionist measures to reshape U.S. trade with China and other trading partners in a broader sense. So what does this mean, and what is the global economic and geopolitical consequences that might follow these policies? What do we even make out of all this?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So already the first thing that people would normally think about with the protectionist policy is probably because of the nature of Trump, the stereotype of him being a deal maker, almost reflective in the way he dealt with China in his first term and the likes of it. But again, there is a geopolitical dimension to it, which a section of the United States is not openly acknowledging, at this point in time, which is that there is a tectonic change in the global economic dimension at this point in time. And Trump and his team and his section of United States understand that this moment that we have is no longer a moment where the United States holds supreme in global economic affairs. It is a truth that they have acknowledged and they have told themselves. For example, geopolitically, we understand that the present global arrangement is a liberal global arrangement, which came up after the Second World War. We'll come to that later. And also, after the Cold War, at the end of the Soviet era, the Soviet Union, there was what we call the unipolar moment. The unipolar moment was that, the liberal idea has reigned supreme, and therefore the West and its allies has a manifest destiny to then impose their idea, their economic, their political idea on the world. Global liberal arrangement and the likes of it. It then gets the United States to be so much committed politically, so much committed economically. Politically, we'll still have to talk about USAID as time goes on as well. And then commitment financially as well as the global policeman, the global enforcer, the global economic powerhouse in the real sense of it. And then with it comes the dynamics of globalization. That's not a subject for today, because I used to say that globalization was going to be the logical outcome of liberalism in the real sense of it. But again, it was not allowed to take a natural form. It was sped up along the line. That's why we're having the crisis that we're having at this point in time. But again, the old globalization thing, and before you know it, sometimes around the 2000s, 2010, 17, then we started having the growth of the Asians, particularly the Chinese. Silent growth in a way looks as if they do not form a threat, but this is an economy that is massive. They not only have labor, but they also have capital. And as we can see in recent times, they have technical know-how. They are becoming the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. Most of the things that we use have been produced in China. They can outproduce any country. So this is the reality of the world now. The United States policymaker can no longer say in the real sense of it that, we are still in a unipolar moment. The Biden White House tried as much as possible to continue to think that way, but deep down they understood that it is difficult to keep having that manifest destiny upon themselves, continuous spending, influencing global trade, and the likes of it. So somehow we are seeing that China is becoming a global power, contending with the United States itself. In fact, Trump believed that economically, the only contention and the only opponents that they have are the Chinese, in terms of idea, in terms of capital, and the likes of it. So for them coming in is like, we need to have what we call the spheres of influence. It appears that if we continue to think this way, we are going to run into trouble. The United States is over or almost $36 trillion in debt, and that's a massive debt. They pay up to $435 billion to service their debtors at March. It's massive as well. And under the Biden era, they did not put a break to this outward spending, continuous debt. So it's like a circle. So somehow, if nobody is going to come in to address this kind of issue, along the line, we may end up having a crash the same way we had in the 2008, 2010, and the likes of it. So that informs Trump's idea and policy, like the dealings with every nations of the world now is not going to be based on that foundational liberal idea that, we are everything to everybody. We control everything. We have a manifest destiny to dictate the liberal economic idea, whereby people have access to our market, we can influence things and the like. So it's like, we don't want to deceive ourselves. Now, the Europeans are not going to have the unfettered access negotiated access that they have into our market. The Canadians are not going to have it. The Mexicans are not going to have it. And we see it also reflecting in immigration policy. The Chinese especially won't have that unfettered access as well, even while we have the same product that they produce, because they mass produce, So that defines his policy with regards to tariff. So tariff, number one, is a money-making thing for him. Then number two is to re-establish a new geopolitical identity for the United States based on what they believe, So why should we give an unfettered access to our market, knowing fully well that China itself is a peer competitor? This is how the Trump government see China, and this is also what defines his relations with country. You must have also heard that he's not only talking about tariff with regards to China, he has rolled out a couple of tariffs with regards to Canada, with regards to European Union as well, even with regards to Mexico, their South American neighbor. So it is a more geopolitical thing. A lot of people would want to think that, that's how Trump does things. But eventually, even if Trump had not come up, that may end up being the overall policy that the United States would have to have if they want to put a brake to the way the economy is. First and foremost, they realize that we are no longer in a so unipolar moment where we dictate and determine everything. We are gradually in a sphere of influence kind of world where you have multipolar influence. And then we need to protect our space. We need to reintroduce tariff, which is protectionist. And somehow that is a contrarian to the liberal idea about free trade and the likes of it. So that continual practice of free trade, liberal idea at this point in time is not in the interest of the United States in the perception of the Trump government. So given the changing geopolitical realities as well as the financial reality of the United States government. I've just told you that they are over $35 billion in debt. They service their debt, and that's massive. They service, as at March, it's about $435 billion in terms of servicing. The guys that hold most of these debts are the Japanese. The Japanese hold like $1 trillion, if I'm correct, $1 trillion of the debt. Same thing applied to China and Britain as well. So somehow, eventually, there's going to be a change. But this is how he approaches the world.
Thank you for that detailed and insightful response. I mean, it's high time we all recognize that the world order is changing. So it's better we position ourselves to take and seize opportunities that comes with it, rather than still retreating the stereotypes. I think that's really important to note. I also take further on some of the things you touched on while you were referring to, while you were answering the first question. You talked about some of the executive order on immigration and work visas. And this actually, it's more like it applies to us Africans because we have a lot of diasporas in the United States. So I want us to talk more broadly about it. How does this policy, how would it affect first the US labor market itself? And secondly, how would it affect the businesses, in the economy, the US economy, and also Africans? Would that affect remittance inflow, capital inflow? Does that have any impact on exchange rate? What's the broad overview? And is it like a really bad, is it a bad news for us? Is it a shock wave? Or is it expected? Like, is it expected? And in your own view, is it a fair policy? Looking at it as a political economist, not as an African in that sense.
Well, immigration is a big deal in Europe. Immigration is a big deal in America. We don't want to begin to go into the historical dimension to that. 2 days ago, the German foreign minister was saying that our economy, our population is we have problem with our population. So the only way we can compensate for it is through immigration. Now, that is a party. There's another party, AfD, in Germany, that does not subscribe to that. So I'm just saying that immigration is a big deal in places that are outside of the global south. Now, in the United States, for example, again, there's a political dimension to it, which is like Trump is appealing to his political base. If you look at the momentum with which he dealt, the executive order with which he dealt with the immigration thing when he initially came in, you would realize that it appears that the heat has reduced, kind of, compared to when he came in. So he has to appeal to his political base. There's a section in America that also believe that, immigrants are part of the problems that they are facing. Immigrants are coming to take our job, economically, socially, and they are not even trying to fully acclimatize themselves with the culture and the likes of it. There's a whole lot of conspiracy about immigration as well. So it's deeply political. So I won't. He has to appeal to his political base in the real sense of it. Another dimension again is that what implication does it has for Africans? Again, another thing is, if you're in the US and you have legally kind of, maybe you have a green card, I don't think there's really there's really a problem in the real sense of it. Over time, the extent to which Trump can be able to emphasize and pursue this, is still arguable, But again, there is a factor of election also in this conversation. But as it then affects the global south, there's what we call the push factors, the push and pull factors. There are push factors here that make people to find a way to leave their country and migrate to other parts of the world. Now, where they consider as benefiting to them economically depends on who is migrating. Some feel that it's United States, some feel that it's Europe. But there are push factors, and the push factors are usually economic factors as well, And again, these push factors again can be linked to geopolitical situation. For example, Libya used to be what it is, but the moment the Libyan government that we know crashed, we don't have, in the real sense of it, a unified Libyan state. So you have pockets of, you have like two states there existing. You have pockets of militias happening. So it's like a no-go zone. And that is an area through which migration happens as well. So distortion in some part of Africa and in some part of the global south, economic problems in a way make people to feel that there's no hope where they are, and they feel that, perhaps there are better hopes elsewhere. So it's the extant global south issues that we continue to experience, which often leads to these push factors of people feeling that, they don't think there's a future where they are. Perhaps there is future in America, there's future in Europe, and they also would not just sit down. Political parties are going to arise as a result of these conversations, are going to be built around it. Pressures are going to be based, are going to be put on the social structures that are also there as well. But again, it depends on the party, it depends on the country. I'm just giving an example of Germany and the German foreign minister saying that, they have a peculiar problem with their population, and the only way they can cope is through immigration. Again, several populist governments in Europe would not subscribe to that, as well as countries such as Hungary, even Poland, So that's just that.
A whole lot to unpack there. So it's more of an ideology thing than just Trump's like a policy rollout. Trump is more of an ideology. And like you said, for those whose immigration process was legally, they have nothing to worry about. Those that moved, that they migrated legally, they have nothing to worry about. But another thing is just to also mention that before we move to another issue, is to talk about the inflow that we expect from diaspora remittances. for those who have said they can affect capital flow and all that. I mean, that's just looking at it in one angle. And generally, like you said, what Trump and his administration is doing, it's more of trying to, bring themselves up to speed with the new world, changing world order. And that is very
Yeah.
important for their policy that they have. All right. I want us to still talk a little more on issues related to Africa.
Yeah.
Now, let's look at the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. Trump has previously criticized this act, and with recent executive order and actions, he was already hinting a shift that US trade priorities could actually see a weakening or restructuring of these agreements with Africa. What does that mean? What does that even mean? And what does it do to Nigeria as well? Can you just help us unpack that as well? Do we do we see a negative impact here, or is it expected? Like, is this something that we've not always expected? So can you just really talk that
Well,
through?
it it will be somehow if we say that we don't expect that to happen. And I wouldn't say that this is a dent on African policy makers, because I know the precariousness of the political context where we exist, that operates here in Africa. You see, in every economic or political relationship, there is a question of interest, and you also need to understand your position in that relationship. Within this economic agreement, Africa is considered as a junior partner, in the real sense of it. And what do you have to offer? What are you trading in? You are trading in, it's not that we are trading in human capital, quality human capital. It's not that we are trading in infrastructure in the real sense. We don't even trade amongst ourselves. So you are subject to a situation whereby that relationship or that policy could then be used to blackmail you, because we don't trade amongst ourselves. The other day I was joking with some of my students, like, oh, it's easier for you to wake up one day and say you want to go to your country through Ryanair. With 50 pounds or with 40 pounds, you can get a flight from England to Italy, And I said, I can't do that here. Like, I need to think before I decide to go home, And if I'm going home, if there's no Nigerian Airways and I pick up a flight, the flight will have to, if I pick up a French Airways, the French Airways will probably have to go to Paris, and then from Paris relocate back to where I'm going from. If I pick up a Rwandan here, it would have to pick up from here, go to Rwanda, and then go back. So there is no movement at all amongst us. So the relationship, the economic relationship in terms of trade that we have with most parts in the world, we are considered as a junior partner in the real sense of it. So, and also, you also must understand that this whole policy, again, is founded on a liberal idea, But here is a president that is thinking that perhaps we can no longer continue to sustain this, because we know the reality of our global commitments and we know the reality of our economy. So it's not even going to think twice, step out of that policy, because again, like I said, you can tariff China and China can tariff back. You can tariff Europe can tariff back. But if you tariff Africa, what do we have to tariff back? Number one, we don't have a formidable union like the European Union. We do not have a formidable economy like the Chinese have, So we don't even have processes or policy infrastructures or political interstices amongst ourselves where we can then form a formidable bloc, to then a unified bloc where we can have a unified negotiation with global bodies. The same thing we have with China, we'll have another one with the US, we'll have another one with the Russians and the likes of it. So agreement and policies are what they are in the international system. They are not casted on stone. a government can come tomorrow and say that, oh, what happened the last time? There are geopolitical and economic changes that we need to face that reality. Then we need to renegotiate. Now, renegotiating then would then depends on what cards do we hold. So my argument with what card does Africa hold? We don't have a formidable card for us to then say, oh, we don't give a damn what you talk about. We are also a senior partner in this relationship, and you have a lot to lose in the real sense of it. Nobody is talking about it. African Union is not debating about it. Nations in Africa are not coming together to say that, oh, we don't even have a unified front to say that this is Trump's thinking, and this is how we are going to go ahead. Other parts of the world, and the EU had meetings on, oh, this is the Trump idea, and this is how we think we should confront it. You had seen it recently in the way they had approached him. Same thing applies to the Chinese. Foreign policy document had been redrafted, renegotiated to understand the reality that we face with the new American government, but we don't have it here in the real sense of it. So we don't dictate what happened. Like I said, we are junior partners. So and what do we have to offer? It's not that we have technical know-how. It's not that we have the quality human capital. It's not that we have infrastructural wherewithal to even attract more other than primary resources, which has always been the case. So Trump can then decide that, okay, I'm not dealing with Africa as a whole. I'm going to be negotiating with each country, which he has done with Congo. Well, I don't know how true that, but there's a rumor he had negotiation with Congo on, oh, we are going to provide you security. We just need, we need a subsoil agreement with regards to your resources. If he does that, it's in the interest of the United States. And the reason why we'll be able to do that is because he also knows that we don't have a unified front. This also boils to understanding the changing realities of the world. And there is no time that being unified regionally is more important than at this moment. But I don't think the global south, particularly Africa, has gotten this. So if you are not on the table, you are going to be part of the menu. So which is what is happening now to us.
So sad. Because I just thinking about everything you said and all where Africa stay, what our reality is, it's almost as if we are at the mercy, coming into the world of all these policies and global political forces. Because, like you rightly said, we have nothing to bring to the table in that sense, and we are not forming a coalition or a structured body, as Africans ourselves, where we can pull even the little resources together. We bring our little resources together and come with a strong, formidable force that can be a negotiating power for us with other. But we don't have. But before we even move to other regions, I want to ask this follow-up question. So, what should Africans be doing, given this context that you have painted and this reality, this changing world order? How we are seeing, also saw, just to mention again, we saw how Canada responded to some of the tariffs that were rolled at them. They had something to protect. But Africans, we are still asking for aid, literally begging investors, begging investors to come and feed us in that sense. But I think there is much more. And the same way, I saw the report by Spears, how that they've been tracking some of the major investments that have been coming to Africa. So it shows that some people are actually looking into the region. Because I feel like if we come together as a region or sub-regions within Africa, not just South Africa as a whole, there are still some things we can do. So as a political economist, what are the things that you feel we can do now that can enhance our negotiation power in global context? And also, what are I don't want to believe that we are totally, we don't have anything to offer, like in the real sense. What are the things we can take advantage of? And how can we reposition ourselves so that we can also have something to negotiate with? Even if it's not at the level where China, the European Union are, but at least something to defend our continent, to defend ourselves. What do you think? What are the right things for example?
You see, it's as good as the whole thing. It never changed because we don't practice it. The point is, we need to trade more amongst ourselves. why should I want to travel to Kenya and I'm being I'm going through a lot of bottlenecks, visa, thing. It could take me up to 3-4 years. I mean, I said years, months, or before I could access another fellow African economy and the like. So first of all, we need to trade more. It's important for us to trade more amongst ourselves. Technically, I would say that Europe with the European Union has no border. It's in Africa here that you have a lot of borders. Europe with the European Union has no border. You can technically move from one place to another with the old Schengen visa system. You're in Poland, before you know it, if you want to go to Germany, you can cross over with the Schengen visa, and that's how it works. There's no restriction within. By so doing, people are able to move from one place to another. Goods are able to move from one place to another. Institutions are then now built around these norms and this movement. Before you know it, economic relationship improves. So I don't see a Polish person. What I see is a European person. A Romanian is here in England. What they see is a European. They are not seeing a Romanian in the real sense of it. So it's easier. The social structure is built around that. But here we have a lot of bottlenecks. So first and foremost, there was a time the Kenyan government thinking along this line said, henceforth, I don't know whether they implemented that, every African will be free to enter Kenya and leave Kenya at every point in time that they need. Well, I don't know the extent, whether that's a political statement, the extent to which Ruto implemented that. But to be able to form a formidable front, first and foremost, we need to find a way to trade, have interconnected economic relationship amongst ourselves. Solve the border issue. Here in West Africa, ECOWAS used to be the ideal sub-regional organization that other sub-regional organizations look up to, especially when it comes to security and economy. With an ECOWAS visa, you can spend up to 60 days or more than 60 days in a fellow country. But now, is in one way or the other, you also have that division also within ECOWAS. You have like 4 or 3 countries decide that, we are not going to be into this business. And we had cases like that in the past. So first and foremost, we need to find a way to pull down the borders and trade amongst ourselves. All the restriction to trade, all the restriction to movement need to be pulled down. And in the real sense of it, we have several policies, several institutions, even within the African Union, that pay lip service to this issue. All you just need to do is to implement this. Why should there be a restriction for me to go to Egypt? Why should there be a restriction for me to go to Lesotho as an African? Why don't we have that regional, sub-regional body? The AU itself, in a way, is just an institution the way it is. Geopolitically, we always say that, why are we always at the receiving end? We are not in the conversation. And somehow, the AU is also an institution to blame. We couldn't even solve our own problem ourselves. A good example is what happened in Libya. We couldn't form a unified front. We couldn't form a unified force to enforce change there. We had to wait for external bodies to come and declare a no-fly zone. And you know what? The problem is our own. At the end of the day, Libya becomes our problem. We waited. We have an African Union with over 30 years experience in resolving issues and the likes of it, and we couldn't address the problem in our doorstep. And then what happens? External bodies came in, described Libya as a geopolitical challenge to them, and then resolve the problem the way they think it's okay. At the end of the day, the problem is ours. The terrorism issue that we are facing in some parts of Nigeria is because of the problem in Libya as well. So what I'm trying to say is that if we don't form a unified front, we will keep having these issues whereby we become menu for other countries that has geopolitical interest, and the implication is going to be our own. Nobody cares what is happening in Libya now. Nobody cares that there is an international slavery wing going on in Libya, that it is a place where people pass through to go to another country. There are several African citizens who are trapped in slave camps in Libya. Nobody is talking about it. But about 20 years ago, it wasn't like so. But what happened is that we sat back and we watched other parts of the world come to do this thing for us. The implication is what we are having now. So we need to find a way to solve our problem by ourselves, find a way to pull down the restriction on trade, find a way to pull down the restriction of general movement amongst ourselves, form a African-oriented trade policy, that is not is in the interest of the sub-region for us to then be able to negotiate based on our core interests. By that time, maybe we will be called to the table and not become a menu,
Hopefully. Oh, a lot for us to do. So I'm just wondering because this has been a long time conversation as to why Africa needs to rise up to its identity. And the funny thing or the amazing thing here is that it's not particular to say Nigeria. It's actually cut across Africa and cut across different geopolitical zones or what our regional blocks within the African continent. And a lot for us to do. And like rightly said, I don't think this is the time for us to stand up for ourselves and don't wait for the Western to come and solve some of these lasting problems that has lingered and has impeded our growth for too long. I'm going to take the conversation ahead now. I'm taking it off Africa and let's talk about NATO and the European Union for a while. So there have been tariffs on European goods by the United States, Trump's administration and all, and of course there have been discussion on NATO burden sharing. I want you to talk about this because I know Trump revived some disputes on European trade and NATO spending, threatening some tariffs and all. So how can these moves, affect the United States and also its relationship with Europeans? What are the steps Europeans? Because I know you mentioned it during the course of one of the discourse earlier that European Union also they're already having this meeting as how to protect themselves. I don't want to use the word fight back, but how to protect themselves and minimize the impact or the negative impact of all this policy rollout by the United States. So what are they doing and what do you think can happen? How can this, affect relationship between the United States and the European Union and also possible opening up for more relationship with China, and other trading partners like Africa. So what do you think is at play here concerning the United States?
Yeah, so the thing with the old EU NATO thing is, now, before now, the EU used to be like a formidable body, like a global economic force of its own, a partner of the United States as it is, and that's that. And then you have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which came up after the Second World War, because when the Cold War, it was at that period we have a bipolar world where you have two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States, and United States and its allies, and the Soviet Union and its allies. So NATO was like a military bloc against the Soviet Union and its allies, which also had its own military bloc, like the Warsaw Pact, and there are within NATO itself. It means that if you're an ally of the United States and you are part of NATO, once you are attacked by another country in the real sense of it that is not a member of NATO, there is the Article 5, which says that the United States or all NATO members can come to your protection in that case, and that works within the Cold War era. It serves as a deterrence because really you have two superpowers and who have loads of nuclear weapons shared between them, so nobody wants to go into war with each other. So there is that deterrence and it works, So, but immediately the Soviet Union disintegrated in the 1980s. Some quarters think that at that moment there was no longer need for NATO because the reason why NATO was created was to serve as a bloc against the Soviet Union and its ally. Now that there is no NATO anymore, now that there's no Soviet Union anymore, then there is no need for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization bloc, which is perceived as a defensive alliance against the influence and the military power of the Soviet Union. So that is the original reason why it was introduced. So if the reason it does no longer exist, then what is the point of NATO? So a lot of people had argued that in the 90s, NATO should have been disintegrated. But what happens in the 90s was that immediately the Soviet Union disintegrates, and there was this general conventional agreement that the Soviet Union leaders had with United States and NATO that, okay, this is what is going to happen, but the NATO would not move a inch east, will not move an inch east to this former Soviet Union country. But what happened immediately after the breakup of the Soviet Union was you then start having the United States changed policy. Suddenly just changed policy and we are just not going to end it here. And then you started having the new former Soviet Union countries all coming to join NATO. You had Latvia, we had Lithuania, you had Hungary, and the likes of them. So that's how NATO is. So it is a military bloc. So there are questions about what is the need for NATO? Like, if it is a defensive bloc, what is it defending against? Exactly. Why do we still need NATO? There is no Soviet Union again. What is the threat that NATO is protecting against? There are several conversations on the Russian threat. We are not going to go into that conversation now, but the point is there is a history around NATO. There is a reason why it was introduced, and there is a question on, so why is NATO expanding if after the end of the Soviet Union, there was a kind of agreement that, NATO need not move to the spheres of influence of the Russians, But again, it happened. The Russians are weak. They kept talking about it, so they keep expanding. So the question is, what is NATO expanding against? What are they defending against? Is there a new war? There's no Soviet Union anymore. So what is happening? Why the expansion? So a lot of scholars believe that NATO itself has no longer served any interest. In fact, the interest is meant to serve is now against that interest, because the whole essence is to defend against Europe. Perhaps the existence of NATO itself is a threat against Europe, because the more other global powers see, in quotes, the aggressive nature of NATO, the more they become prepared, like, oh, NATO is a threat to us, So that's on the side. And again, there's a dimension to NATO, which is that the United States pay more for NATO. They contribute more in terms of military subsidization. There's a rule that says that each member of NATO should contribute 2% of their GDP to NATO, But some 1%, some less than 1%. So it's like the United States subsidized NATO. And that was what I said from the beginning when I said that at a point in time, the United States feel that they are paying more to defend Europe. And the Europeans are not defending themselves in terms of financial commitment. So questions are arising within the American policy circle and population that what are we defending Europe against, one? Why are we paying more at the expense of our economy to defend Europe against what? Exactly. So Trump come up and like, guys, you need to be involved in your defense. We cannot keep spending money. We don't even have the luxury to do so. We are in debt. So at least the 2% contribution from your GDP, you guys need to meet up with it. So it's like Europe can afford to invest in social infrastructure, social life, quality of life, because they know that they have America as a partner. America is their security guarantor. So the same is not in the US. NATO and EU or European countries can afford to have free healthcare and the likes of it, but here in the US, you don't have that happening, because they are so much invested in this. So these are thinkings that are going within the American policy circle, and again, here comes the emergence of Eurasia. You have China, you have Russians, you have the Indians and the like. So the Americans are not seeing anything happening in Europe. They feel that a threat to their national interest is in Eurasia. The Chinese are the major threat to their national interest. This also brings conversation regarding the Greenland, taking over Greenland and the likes of it. In the real sense of it, the United States does not really see the Russians as threat. They don't see a threat in Europe. They don't feel that the threat to Europe is a threat to them in the real sense of it. In the American policy circle as at now, what they see as an economic and a military threat to them is China. China is number one. You must have heard in every conversation that we need to finish whatever we are doing with the Russians and the Europeans for us to quickly pivot to China. China is the main thing. China is what we need to do. And the likes of it, that's where they want to pivot to. And everything Trump is trying to do is that I need to settle this thing between the Russians and the Europeans, because the thing that we need to deal with that the Chinese are growing economically. The United States see them as a threat to their global hegemony, irrespective of whatever you want to say. The Chinese, they see the Chinese as a strategic threat to their global hegemony. So the United States does not want to be tied down in Europe. But the Europeans also does not want the United States to go. Because the point is that it means that there is no subsidization to their security. It means that they are going to spend more on security. And if they spend more on security, it means that they are not spending more on other things, which could destabilize the population. In a way, it's the reality of what is happening now. It's also making the Europeans to then say, okay, should we pivot to EU and to China, have more relation with China? But China itself is strategic in all this. He also knows that everybody is trying to play an interest and the like. So Trump wants the Europeans to be more involved in their security. We cannot keep subsidizing your security while you are paying less. So if you feel that the Russians are threats to your security, then demonstrate it by the amount of contribution you give to NATO as well. Pay more for your security, not United States paying more for your security as a result of that. So demonstrate that. So if they are a threat, pay more for security. And again, there is also a strategic sense to it, strategic balance to it, which is the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. The reason why Europeans, apart from France and Britain, in the real sense of it, there's no nuclear proliferation in Europe, is because they are guaranteed by the United States as a nuclear power. So they do not need to develop nuclear weapons. Do you understand? Yeah. So but the problem now is at the moment the United States move out, Europeans, a lot of European countries are beginning to talk about nuclear security, which is we are going to develop nuclear weapons. If the United States is not going to be a security tool, we need to build a deterrence, and the deterrence is nuclear weapons, so that what we perceive as threat will not consume us. The Polish are talking about the development of nuclear weapons. You must have heard about the French also saying that, okay, if the United States is not going to provide that role, we are going to bring other European countries under our nuclear umbrella. So you see how intertwined it is, and it's difficult to navigate that geopolitical angle. Here is an America who does not want to, who feel that is paying more for a people who are not really appreciating it in the real sense of it, and he feels that his problem is not Europe, his problem is China, and he cannot fight a two-pronged war. You cannot be facing a problem in Europe and facing a problem in China. You need to divert all resources to China. So how do you stop? How do you handle Europe, resolve the issue there so that you can pivot to what you see as a primary challenge to your own national interest? That's a problem. So the whole tariff thing and the likes of it, honestly, there's a lot of division within the American system regarding Europe. I think it's going to be difficult for Trump to really pivot out I'm interested in how he's going to navigate that space, because within that you also have the globalists to contend with in Europe. He has also rolled up a lot of tariffs and the likes of it, and Europe are also threatened that they're going to retaliate. They have talked about technology sharing, how they are also going to sanction Elon Musk, AI, develop their own AI. So you are seeing new global competition, all geopolitically based on their interests, all because the United States is having a shift within. Because they used to think that the United States is the one that manages all these things, But again, the global changes that is happening now is making the United States feel that, we are so much involved in several things that we are ignoring what is happening in Eurasia, and that is where the real challenge is coming from. So it is what it is. It's something we keep talking about. Yeah,
That's really a lot of fact. So it only clearly shows that there's a lot of restructuring happening, not just
yeah,
even with the United States, although the steering started from Trump and all these new policies and all. But we are seeing a reaction or responses by other world's leaders and other economies. And I only want to just see what would happen, going forward because of all these changes. We begin to see a lot of, and this also speaks to the issue of protectionism. Everybody is trying to now see at first, American first. So everybody is European first,
yeah.
Chinese first, right? So everybody is trying to at least protect themselves first. And for those that are within a union, they're trying to see how they can actually become a more formidable force in that sense and have a more coherent objective and go towards. And I really want to just mention that I am this perspective anyway has broadened my understanding of all these things that is happening. As an economist, I would have just looked at this from an economic lens alone, but having this enriching conversation with you, it has actually opened up a lot of more questions, and as time goes on, I still need to address all of those and see how all this would eventually affect world economy. This
It's,
is
it,
a change
it's,
in
it,
world
it's beyond the model, actually. It's beyond, it was,
that is the it
is
is beyond
totally beyond the model. And that's why some American scholars even feel that um, America, in a way, was misled into the trap of the unipolar moment. For example, you have scholars like Asmoglu, Fukuyama, and the likes of them painting a picture of like, there is nothing in China. Like the kind of model of development that they have cannot achieve what we have, what the liberal system has achieved. So in a way, it does not make the American policymakers to pay attention to that. But wahoo, it happens, and everybody was wrong. Do you understand? Everybody was wrong at the end of the day, So there is an alternative, not an alternative, but there's an alternative to the whole liberal structure. So which means that you could sanction some countries in the world, and they will be unsanctioned in the real sense of it. Like, you force us not to use the American dollar, you politicize the sanction, and what's gonna happen is that they are not going to come begging. They would then begin to form new economic partnership of sanctioned countries, who would then begin to build alternative economic relationship to contend, like, if we can't trade with the Americans, then we are going to trade with the Chinese, we're going to trade with the Iranians, we're going to trade with the Indonesians, and then we are a sovereign country. So do whatever you want to do with the dollar. And that is why recently, even within the American circle, the Trump circle, they are saying that there is a problem with sanctions, because the whole world now see that we are using the American dollar as sanction as a way of manipulating or enforcing America's will on global economy. So people are pulling back, countries are pulling back, countries are trying to form alternative to SWIFT payment system. Countries are now resorting to their own national currency to trade. And there is a rethink that, how do we thought that, there are no countries that are sanction proof, but apparently countries can still exist outside of this, But academically, this was what we had been told, that, oh, the end of the world is liberalism and the countries cannot form an alternative. And that was why I said earlier that the logical end of liberalism would have been globalization. It's just going to take time. But what happened is that it then became sped up. It then became sped up in such a way that it led to a lot of inequality and obvious difference, which then leads to so much economic rebellion, of which America is falling a victim of it now. And that's why you are having Trump saying that perhaps we have to find a way to address this. If the Democrats come to power in the next 4 years, they are also going to understand this reality, but their approach to it may not be the approach that Trump is taking. But whatever approach that they are taking will signify the fact that they understand that there is a global shift at this point in time, and we can no longer be approaching the world the way we had approached it in the past.
I agree with you. I really agree with you. And I think we'll still have another conversation on globalization in the real sense, because you alluded to something that, and I've even done a study on it personally, looking at how globalization has impacted income inequality. And we have seen that widespread among countries and within a country too. So that's another discourse that would also enrich, or that we need to also have in coming days. So let's see globalization, what are the what are the risks, what are the what I would call the disadvantages, what are the costs that it has brought, and what are the benefits we have actually had, and what is the shift? Because globalization is what? It can't be it's what. So we'll still have that discourse. But going forward on this, I think I'd like to talk about energy a little bit. A little. Let's talk about energy and probably conclude on that. So I want to ask you, for Trump's stance on energy security and global markets, Trump has prioritized that U.S. energy independence, and this popular saying, "Drill, baby, drill." It became a language after his inaugural speech. So to just talk a little on it, to these policies, along with the potential sanctions that we are seeing, how will it affect oil producing nations? Okay, will it create new energy alliance, as we are seeing new trade alliance, as we are seeing new geopolitical alliance? Will it also create a new energy alliance? With this destruction, or this destruction that we are seeing in the global energy space, what is it going to impact to Africa? And I want you to talk about Africa because, for instance, Nigeria, we are one of the major exporters of food oil, and it's a major source, in Africa, and it's a major source of our foreign exchange, and that's where we get most of our foreign exchange from, aside possible investment and probably some foreign direct investment and political things that are coming. What does this mean to us? Are we positioned for the likelihood of America pushing this forward? What happens if OPEC continues to with cost production costs in order to support price? What is our take in this? What is all this happen? What is happening? And if you start seeing new clients, energy clients, and amongst other countries, does that mean does that mean OPEC as a body, we are already threatening their existence? Does that mean, what does this even post? What are we looking at? Can you just give a broad overview and probably narrow it down to the Nigerian context as well?
So the energy thing has always been a big deal in global affairs. Is all about access to energy. Access to energy means a lot. A lot of things. And the countries also always try to find a way to secure global energy routes. For example, the United States would not want to have a problem with Saudi Arabia being the largest energy producer in the world. They also want to ensure that they kind of have influence or secure whatever is happening in countries like Venezuela. Same thing with with the situation in the Middle East, because that's the global energy chokehold. If there's a problem there's going to be a problem with energy prices around the world. So again, there is the energy dimension to everything that is happening. Same thing applies to China as well. This is an economy that is running, at a very high speed, and it means that it needs access to energy. Access to energy then means that it needs to control the various trade routes through which energy pass through. For example, they are building several pipelines to the Russian gas market, petroleum market, Siberian power energy, and the likes of it. And same things, they're establishing relationship with the Middle East. But what they're trying to do is to make sure that they are not solely reliant on some countries, on one country for energy. That this the problem with this route, there's no problem with this route. So countries always try to find a way to control that energy flow, because energy is so has a lot of impact on the American economy. They are very sensitive to the price of oil. Everything that they are always trying to do is to find a way to negotiate, to have what it takes to negotiate within the global energy market in such a way that they can keep the energy prices lower. They can afford that because they have several sectors within the economy. Now, what influence does it have on countries who are producing, especially countries in the global south like we have in Africa, Nigeria, Angola, and the likes of it? You will keep having problems if everything you depend on is on energy, especially when you do not control the price. And that is why they cannot afford to leave OPEC in one way or the other, because it's going to be difficult for you to control. OPEC in one way or the other still has influence on the global energy market. We saw how that played out under Biden. In fact, we call them OPEC Plus because we know there are some countries like the Russians are not part of OPEC. But again, in a way, despite the activities of the Biden government, sanctions and the likes of it, controlling the global trade route, in a way, the Russians were able to implement and solidify their relationship with OPEC in such a way that it does not affect their economy, because the prices of oil also have influence on the amount of resources, revenues that they're able to make. But coming down to other countries who are solely reliant on oil, I don't have at hand now statistically the extent to which our economy is dependent on oil, but I understand that our budget and the likes of it are dependent on the prices of oil, and we really don't have I don't think we have a bigger sector that we so much rely on. If there is a problem with the energy market, it's going to spell a lot of challenges for countries like Nigeria, because solely we depend on the global energy market. I don't see a problem with OPEC at the moment, given the nature of Trump. The American economy itself has what it takes to sustain itself when it comes to energy. You have energy within America itself. There's energy in South America. If they decide to maximize the production of energy within the United States, they are self-sufficient on their own. So, but again, Trump had deal with the Qataris, had deals with the Saudi Arabia, and it seems to kind of have a lot of relationship with Trump in a way, fluctuating global energy market in the real sense of it. But again, you also know that the Middle East countries like Saudi Arabia and the likes of it are also dependent on global energy market, and they also want to retain the control on the prices. It's very important to the Saudis that the control of global oil prices still lies with them. That was why when the European Union were saying that they were going to they wanted to give a cap to the Russian a price cap for the Russian oil or the Russian gas of $60 or so. The Saudis were not happy about it. It's like that is the negotiating power that they have. They can solely, with their partners, determine the energy price. So if you take that away from them, it's like they are not in the game. And that didn't work, So in a way, Trump is going to have various agreements, and like the present Saudi and Trump, I don't think they have any issue with their relation. But the point is, energy prices are going to be influenced, negotiated, by partners and global bodies and the likes of it. But for countries that are solely reliant on the fluctuation solely reliant on energy, no diversion or the likes of it, that's going to be that's going to be a problem. But again, they probably will do well to keep sticking to OPEC, because I don't see OPEC going away anytime soon. At this moment, I think irrespective of the attempts to find alternative to carbons, to environmental alternatives and the likes of it, I think that we are still a bit far off when it comes to that. So in a way, the global economy will still be powered by that. But the point is that there is need for decentralization of means of generating revenue for countries in Africa that are reliant on oil, especially Nigeria. We had seen that happen with the United Arab Emirates. Oil is not a big deal. Prices in the global oil market is not a big deal to them. The economy will still find a way to float and survive. The extent to which that can work in Nigeria is questionable. Infrastructure-wise, I don't think we have achieved so much to even attract more investment outside of oil, outside of our petroleum economy, and the likes of it. So somehow we will still be subjected to the vagaries of the global oil market. There's nothing we can do about that. But again, it will still do well to still stick to OPEC at this point in time.
That's really profound. And unfortunately so, Nigeria has found itself in the midst of all this, because largely we still depend on oil. The economy is still highly undiversified.
Yeah.
Although we have made some increase in export earnings from non-tradables, but we are still not seeing it at an impressive level. Some of the agricultural products that we are still exporting, we alluded to that earlier as well, they are still on the crude form. We still export raw materials, and it's time to move into value-added manufacturing. I mean, there's a lot back in that, and it's like we have positioned ourselves to literally be at the mercy or at follow whatever direction the world powers are playing. They take on to the right. And we also even as talking even within the oil space now, oil market, we still need to ramp up production, because we have not been meeting up with the quota that we have, and we are still seeing that it's likely that OPEC also reduce cross production quota so as to just support price, to see oil price in a reasonable manner. Because if oil price crashes, you know what that would mean for the exchange rate, that would mean for the foreign rate, what that would eventually for prices of goods and services. The ripple effect is so enormous, and
and that's why it also appears that for us in Africa, I don't know, it seems that how do I put it? Like, I don't want to use the word blinded, but we decide not to see the changes that are happening in the world, at this time. Far back, like 10 years ago, I was listening to an analyst, and I always remember that guy's statement. I said, oh, there's a tectonic shift that is happening in the world right now. And I didn't know how he was able to see that when he said that things are pivoting to China. It was like, oh, the West is known for capital, but here is an economy that is coming up, and it does not only have capital, it has labor. Do you understand? Because capital also needs labor to expand. But the West has humongous capitals at them. But here is an economy that is coming up that does not have only capital. These guys also have labor. At that time, they were the most populous country in the world. And they don't just have a population, they have a sophisticated population. It's not like, oh, we have 1 billion people. No, you have 1 billion people that you can say that 80-90% of them have technical skills and technical knowledge. That is mental infrastructure. Do you understand? So by so doing, it means that if I want to establish a technology company in America, in China, I would have technical guys to recruit. Now, duplicate that here in Nigeria. If I want to establish a playmaking company here, how many aeronautic engineers that you have here that is going to sustain that? And that is going to send a discouraged foreign investment. So here in that country, you have capital, you have labor. Now, you are not talking about ordinary labor, like ordinary population. You have a sophisticated population with technical know-how. Do you understand? And a government that is strategic. Now, here, if as far back as then, that reality has been conceived that there is an emerging country that has that is
We have time.
contained, we have everything.
We have done something. We
You
have
got
time. We will do
at
something.
that time, but we, at this point in time, we still do not know that changes are happening in the world, and we have to find a way to adapt. If we have to readapt the African Union into an economic union, not a political union, economic union, come up with with an African currency, a single African currency that we can also find a way to. We are not even talking about BRICS, the development in BRICS. We are only paying a lip service, but the development in BRICS is an outcome of the global geographic changes. It didn't just come up. Do you understand? But on a unified front, we are not talking about it. We are not talking about this conversation. Countries are already beginning to trade in local currency because of this challenge that you mentioned about fluctuation in the global monetary market, which is also subjected to some changes in the energy fluctuations as well. But we are not talking about that. However, we are being affected, massively affected by it as well. You know, energy changes, capital changes, and currency changes. There needs to be a debate for us if we have to, if we want to be a player in this global change. We can't just be on the sideline like, oh, it's not affecting us. You know, I talked about trade the other time. Do we trade amongst ourselves in dollar, or we trade amongst ourselves in local currencies, in our own currency, thereby not contending with the American dollar, but creating a soft landing for us, like an alternative. You know, the EU has EU as the euro. You understand? And the likes of it. So policies need to reflect this global. You know, we just have to find a way. Like, we need to be strategic, forward thinking that this thing that we are doing is because of this. We are not just thinking of now. Every policy needs to, government coming, political parties campaigning needs to show that there is a global change, a global reality that is happening, and we cannot continue to be on the sideline.
I agree with you. Well said. And also the fact that, you know, you also mentioned it. Aside from that, we are seeing these changes in the geopolitical scene, we are seeing changes in labor market, we are seeing changes, even energy itself. There is this massive shift from oil dependence to cleaner energy. And I'm telling you, that Africa is not taking position. And for few countries that are already suggesting, they are still, the quantum or the size is still nothing compared to what is demanded or expected from us. I just hope that we begin to see the reason and the need for us to first have conversation, excuse me, along these areas, and begin to strategically position ourselves so that in another decade, we will not see the reaction to the problem, but we'll be talking about how far we have gone in execution. This is the time for forward thinking strategy, and this is the time to map out, clearly laid down roadmap, how we can move, even not just as a country, say Nigeria now, as a continent, The last question and the last issue I want us to discuss before we conclude is US AIDS, right? I mean, how would we discuss today and not touch on US AIDS? Like, I just want to just touch on it a little with the context of there's been a lot of talks around it, especially even in the US economy. There's been a lot of layoffs of staff, there's been a cost from, there's been a cost of aid to so many countries that solely depend on it. So just walk us through, one, the motivation behind this for the Trump administration, and what will be the impact on the global economy.
They can no longer finance US aid. Like, there's a financial, there's an economic dimension. This is a country that is $36 trillion in debt. And, you know, it's like the Americans are saying that we are giving so much away for what? We are subsidizing global economy. What is in it for us? What is happening? You know, it's like somebody that is spending so much, thinking that the money is still there. But he doesn't know the money is no longer there, you know. And then at the end of the day, you people are forming alliances against us. You are forming BRICS, you are forming that, you are joining this. So we need to rethink our financial commitment to the world. Trump has gone to the extent of saying that perhaps we need to rethink our association with UN. You know, they have talked about, oh, we need to pull out of WHO because we spend more on them. So why are we part of all these organizations? Like, it's like you are looking at your finances like, why am I? And you guys say I'm in debt. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm doing, like, no wonder, you know. And so it's a whole lot of strategic rethinking and a contention between people that think that, oh, the United States can keep doing this, you know, which is what some parts in Europe are doing, that, oh, you have to keep doing it, you know, it's necessary, it's your manifest destiny, that's why you're the leader. And, you know, how does this whole USA everything came up? Is it in the 80s when the Soviet Union was crashing? Again, the policy thinkers in the United States has to come up with another strategy of interfering, of carrying out geopolitical intervention in a very subtle and, for lack of what to use, in a very subtle and implicit way, like not like the CIA style of, oh, you don't like the government, you overthrow the government, sponsor rebel. No, what they do, so they came up with a strategy of non-government organization, non-government intervention, you know, non-state intervention. Just find a way to sponsor the media, sponsor NGOs, and so on. Then you have the proliferation of non-government organization, most of them being funded by the USA and the National Endowment for Democracy, NED. But again, they are all strategic and geopolitical harm of the United States government, of also finding a way to understand what is happening in every country in the interest of the United States. Like, oh, we need to understand what is happening in Libya. We need to understand what is happening in Nigeria. We need to understand what is happening in Sudan, you know. So most of the United States embassy then operates in such way. There's not going to be outright intervention. We are just going to give funding. We are just going to organize roundtable for media people where we educate them on this and then give them funding on protest, funding of on right girl child education and the likes of it. And that is one of the ways which we, the Americans, become so much involved in several affairs of a lot of countries around the world, implicating them in a lot of things that we are not going to talk about here. But again, it was a strategic policy of, oh, let's change from the outright forceful way of intervening in the affairs of country to the non-government organization way of funding various organizations in those countries. By so doing, nobody is going to see us as doing anything. We are just going to be seen as supporting democracy, supporting media freedom, and the likes of it. And yet, we still achieve our geopolitical interest. Now, contrast that to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. So ask yourself that the Chinese can come here, and that's the strategic thinking. You can come here and say that, oh, the Chinese built the railway in Lagos. The Chinese built certain bridge over there. But ask yourself that what is the infrastructural thing that you could tie with USA in the real sense of it? Can we say this? Oh, the USA built several schools. Oh, this road was financed by USA, you know, and the likes of it. But what the Chinese did was, oh, these guys need infrastructure development. Oh, we have a Belt and Road Initiative. It is our own version of USA. Yeah, we're going to give you, this is not going to be like a hit, but we are going to give you some loans, and it's going to come with some certain interest, but we are going to be involved in infrastructure development and the likes of it. So a lot of African countries were getting China's Loan Belt and Road Initiative tied to infrastructure and the likes of it. But again, there are questions about USA, you know, and NED and the likes of it. But the point is, at the end of the day, they got so much involved. Yeah, it has the positive side, because there was a certain project that I also implemented that was influenced or financed by the National Endowment for Democracy. You know, they were paying my bills at that point in time. You know, the amount of people that are going to be out of job because of that as well. But again, there's a geopolitical dimension. It then makes our government to become somehow irresponsible and be out of you know, it was like the NGO sector became a formidable sector, to the point that you can say that the payment for tuberculosis drug is funded by the United States government, and several funding coming in, and government does not account, and government is not doing a lot of things, So, but again, in politics, interest is key. The ones who give the money are saying that, come on, we can no longer finance USA. In fact, in the real sense of the US aid itself is being considered as a challenge in a way to the American hegemony itself, and here is the government coming up and saying that we are spending a lot of money on US aid. We have to find a way. Either we, when they came in, he said, oh, we suspended for 90 days. We are just going to observe what they are doing. 2 days ago, I'm hearing that, oh, they are closing US aid entirely. And by September 30, they are laying off everybody. The implication for us is that people are going to be out of job at the end of the day. But again, the point is that we are receivers. It's not that we are givers. So I hate to say that it is also a reflection of our economy, because a lot of us have also argued that there is a political economy dimension to foreign aid. You don't dictate the tune. The one who gives you dictate where the money has to go. The Burkina Faso government yesterday, I heard something when the Burkina Faso president was saying that the Saudis gave them a certain amount of money to build 300 mosques, and he was like, no, we don't need mosque. The money from the Saudi, if the Saudi actually wants to give us money, it should be used for infrastructure. So we need to begin to have that conversation, because that is what aid does. Aid makes you to either be indebted or to be at service of the person that is giving it. And it has a challenge to the economy, because these guys that are going to be out of job are going to be burdened on the government. At the end of the day, the pro-democracy activist thing that are being run are going to be underfunded, and that's going to be a lot of problem for us. So, a lot of us feel that a country that depends on aid, or states that depend on aid, they go nowhere. In the real sense of it, it's that you don't have the idea of your own. But from the American perspective, they can no longer fund the US aid. There is also a political dimension that Trump also feels that most of the activities of US aid were also being used against him when he was campaigning. Do you understand? Not only within the US, most of the organizations, the NGOs, the media wing that the US aid funded in other countries, especially you saw the way Europe related to him during the campaign. They didn't hide it that they didn't like him. So he also feels that some of these things are being funded by the United States aids. So it's like, let's close it down. There is the financial wing, there is a political wing, and America is what it is when it comes to issues like this,
Interesting conversation so far. Really, I've learned a lot, and I'm really gaining a lot. But I would also like to touch briefly on this, even as we conclude. I'd like to hear your perspective. Generally, tariffs are often seen as economic weapons. And in your view, I want to know, what are these retaliation tariffs that we have seen from Trump? He has slammed almost all the countries, like most countries with tariffs, if it's at least a 10% baseline tariff across board, then of course differs from country to country. And people have seen these tariffs as this retaliation tariff as a purely economic measure. I want to know, are there really strategic signals in a broader geopolitical game, or what do they really tell us about this Trump administration and foreign policy direction? And what are we expecting to see, even from other responses from other economies, and in the coming election cycle within the US economy? What does this all mean? Can you just unpack this for us briefly?
Yeah. Well, Trump is as predictable as he used to be, as he is, Well, but the point is that you've had several conversations and opinions regarding the tariffs. I'm sure you economists have tried to look at it especially from the domestic wing, trying to evaluate the health of the American economy to be able to justify whether this is worth it, or the likes of the likes of it. So I would not so much dwell on that core aspect, which is the bane of most economists, But one thing I would just like to touch a bit is that usually tariffs is truly an economic policy. And then if you look at the reason why he said that he's introducing the tariff is because he feels that America is having trade imbalances with a lot of countries in the world, and and the reality is that it is not possible for you to have outright trade balance with every country in the world economically. That's not a realistic thing to achieve, based on comparative advantages economically and the likes of it, and again, based on the global value chain in the real sense of it. No matter how industrialized a country is, you do not monopolize all the value chains. In car production, for example, some part of the world are engaged in the labor-intensive value chain, and some parts of the world are engaged in in the highly trained part of the job. So you can have just some production in Mexico, some production in Paraguay, in some other parts of the world, while the highly intellectual or technical part of the job can be done in highly industrialized countries. So the point is, there is a global value chain to this as well. However, the trade imbalances had also been argued that one of the reasons why the United States has trade imbalances is has much more to do with budget deficit, current account deficit, and this is from the fact that they spend more than they generate. You spend more in terms of military, you spend more in terms of non-governmental organizations, several hegemonic activities around the world, So the imbalances is not really in terms of productive capacity, but in terms of they trying to fulfill their manifest hegemonic role across the world. By so doing, you are spending more money than you are taking in. Do you understand? Which is why a lot of us understood when he came in, when he said that he wanted to cut some spending, bringing in the DOGE under Elon Musk, that America is involved in a lot of spendings across the world. And then we have to find a way to cut down these unnecessary spendings, and so that is that. And then the aspect of several debt as well, domestic debt, international debt, and the likes of. So much of the balances is not is out of budget deficit, and they have a substantial deficit in that sense as well. But the idea of you want to achieve trade balance or with all countries around the world, and a lot of countries around the world are ripping off America. That's economically not realistic one, but again, it has a strategic sense to it, and that's why there had been argument about perhaps this is the end of globalization, and then it also helps us to see how the liberal world order works, which is the argument I had made earlier about globalization was going to be the logical conclusion of the world that we have. But the point is that at some stages, it became sped up. Now, you then have different non-governmental, non-state organizations around the world they are institutions that are like a watch over this process. WTO, various regional organizations, and the likes of it. But when a lot of us argue about the integrity of this so-called international organization, it's always as if we are questioning the liberal world order. It is not so. Now we are actually seeing it now. Trump says that, we don't want, we're having trade imbalances, and then we are dishing out tariff. Number one, the parameter for dishing out the tariff itself is, it's funny. Then, secondly, just by coughing of the American economy, you see the way the whole world is catching cold. Then it actually questions the whole globalization thesis. It makes some of us to be justified when we say that the idea of globalization itself is not something that is automatic, that is mechanical. There is a deliberateness to it in the real sense of it. And it looks as if everything is hinged on the American system or the American economy. And at this point in time, it is no longer sustainable for them. It's no longer, the present system is no longer sustainable for the United States. So that was why I argued earlier that even if he had not come up with a tariff policy, they would have found another way. If it were the Democrat that came up, there would have been another way. But the point is, this is how he sees the world. Like, oh, the United States is being ripped off, But in the real sense of it, it does not solve the problem. The problem is cut spending, but they still have budget deficit in there. They still want to continue to play that role of the hegemonic role. America, here we are. Do you understand? So, but there are drastic ways to go about it. Yes, he has tried to see what he can do with the non-state sector, pulling down the USAID and the likes of it. But that is not even substantial enough. And this is a country that is in debt. So for him, it's like, how much are you even going to gain from tariff? Whatever you're gaining from tariff is not even substantial enough to plug the deficit. And the idea of like, oh, the American sector in manufacturing is low and the likes of it, which I had argued earlier, that the idea that the American manufacturing is low itself is a bit laughable because of the global value chain. You cannot have all the chains of production within the American society. Do you understand? It may not even be sustainable for Apple to produce in America. Do you understand? It may not be sustainable, for some of these tech companies to produce there. They would have to look for areas where they feel that, labor and capital is a bit more favorable to them, or distribute their production and decide that, okay, the high-end part of the production will be based in the United States. Why should we be doing the case of the outside part of the car here in the United States when we can decide to focus on the high-end part, the cheap production, the cheap manufacturing here, so we can decide to sublet or do this other part of the production, which does not involve so many training here. By so doing, we will be spending less there, and then here we'll just focus on that high-end part that does not require more. So the idea of, we are being ripped off when it comes to production, the American manufacturing system is that itself is laughable, in the real sense of it. But again, in the strategic sense, this is like an empire that is coughing, that is having problems. Now, what you would have expected is that perhaps we should go in a bit. The global trade arrangement needs to be renegotiated. It is no longer favorable. Now you have situations whereby small nations are coming up, more involved in trade and the likes of it, at the expense of the American system. Like I said, even the consumer market in America is not enough, to buy whatever it is being produced at the end of the day. So you also have to find a way to trade, open up, reciprocate also by opening up your economy in the real sense of it. But again, having this kind of issue, you would have expected a renegotiation of the global trade system. But again, this is like I argued earlier, you want to eat your cake and have it. We need to continue to play that role. But however, we have to find a way to make the world to subsidize us. So if you want to come to the American economy, yes, we are having a problem, but again, you have to find a way to pay for whatever we are going through. If we have to, it has to be us that has to do this, and then we are expecting retaliatory policies from other countries. Perhaps this is where we then need to begin to see organization like BRICS and sub-regional organization, and again, it points to the fact of, which I also mentioned earlier, what is organizations like institutions like World Trade Organization doing? It helps you to know how powerless, in the real sense of it, these global institutions operate. They are designed in a way to uphold the liberal trade structure in an hierarchical way that that probably favors the richer part of the world at the expense of some other part of the world. But the point is, at the moment, it is no longer sustainable. And because of this unsustainability, the American state is in debt. In fact, they have the dollar as the reserve currency, which itself has another effect on them. So the only way is, rather than going domestically, cutting out cost means cutting out global American responsibility, which I don't think the American elites are ready to take for now. So the best part is that we are not going to pull back. We are still going to find a way to maintain this trade structure, but we are not going to lose out of it. But again, like people had argued, I would not say that this is the end of globalization. I would rather say that this is the end of globalization as we know it to be. New form of trade interaction is going to come up. This may be opportunity for sub-regional or regional organization as well. China had retaliated by with about 84% tariff, and I don't know how formidable or how true the report is. There is a reduction in their own currency as well, so it doesn't look as if they are going to back down. And again, you have some other country that are pro-Trump and say that, oh, we are ready to negotiate, but again, this is just few. But these guys are also not going to negotiate from a weak spot. They are probably going to negotiate from what they consider as a comparative advantage to them, but it doesn't solve the problem now. So it's more of a strategic thing rather than a core economic thing. But like I had, the most important thing is that the present global liberal structure is no longer sustainable. But rather than coming to the table and we then renegotiating that, come on, in the past 30, 40 years, we only have few countries that controls the ends of affairs. We have few countries that are rich, that control the various trade routes and so on. But now in this modern age, we are now having several new countries coming up, taking up their destiny in their hands. So there is more trade compared to what we used to have before. And then apart from we having more trade, you then have countries that are a bit resistant to the system. Sanction is no longer working like it used to be. The old way in which America can find a way to compel some parts of the world to be part of the system. The issue of financialization of capital itself is no longer sustainable, especially if you don't have commodity to back it up. So rather than coming to renegotiate based on the present reality, it is like, oh, we are still going to keep using the old thing. So what we are going to do is find a way to ensure that we are subsidized, and then it is not sustainable.
Thank you for that robust analysis and response. Like you said, globalization, as we've known it, the definition and the way we perceive it is changing, and this is time for us to all be strategic, America or not. Everyone has to be strategic. Thank you for that rich perspective.
And I'm sure to our viewers and people that would eventually interact with this resource, they will see how much we need to also learn about the changing global or world order. We need to see how, even for business owners too, now on a micro level, you need to see how the world is changing, and also position yourself to align with the changing order. There are some things that will be out of place, and if you don't understand that this is highly political, we should, and that is also important to how we, unless our businesses, our companies, and whatever we do. So it's more important to on the macro and even on the micro level, So thank you so much, Mr. Usman, for this rich conversation. I'm going to take your profile again, just to emphasize and some of the work you have done. Mr. Usman Alabi is a passionate crusader for social change and a social reformist who believes in the need for disruptive methodologies to address the current socio-economic conditions in sub-Saharan Africa. He was a senior associate, with Red Media Africa for 5 years, leading the Future Project Governance Department. And also he worked with the Nigeria Economic Summit briefly. Mr. Usman received broad training in global politics and comparative political economy during his undergrad and postgrad education at the University of Lagos. He is currently a doctoral researcher at the University of Warwick, and his research focus on everyday political economic of counterterrorism. And that even came out in our conversation. And also one of our research fellows at Kingsgate Advisors Institute within the political economic cluster. And he'll be working on the intersection between the political context and decision making as it relates to macro and microeconomics, which is one of the things that we talked about today. Thank you once again, Mr. Usman, for your time, for taking your time to take us through all these important conversations and why we need to have this perspective going forward before we start playing the blame game. Trump has come again, and Africa is at his legs. We need to understand the global context and have a sound judgment as to what is happening. Thank you once again. And to all our viewers, people staying around with us, and I want to see some of our comments in our comment section. Put there some of the things that you've learned, probably a new thing that you do not even know before, or something that resonates with some of the thinking that you have been having along this conversation. Please put them in the comment section below. We would like to hear from you. And also, if you have any suggestions, you can also put it there. We would like to hear from you. Thank you all for joining us. Stay tuned for other episodes that will be coming up in the coming months. All right.